Hello and welcome to With Wellner Anderson. This is a channel where we talk about economic, political, and financial things in simple terms. Today we're going to be talking about the history of the gentrification of the Oakland, California area. Let me first cite that I note it's the history of the gentrification. This video will give you the background to know how Oakland became gentrification, what to look for in gentrification, and prepare you for going to the other videos on YouTube that have showed you what gentrification has done. So it's a good platform from the beginning. Please subscribe to get other videos on gentrification and other elements and video essays I'll be producing. Okay, so what is gentrification? Gentrification is a term that was coined by a lady named Ruth Glass. She was doing a study in reference to a population in England, and that's where the phrase was coined. Gentrification comes from the word gentry, and gentry is sort of the noble class, the artisans that existed in France. You must destroy a neighborhood in order to gentrify. And the rules are very simple. One is redlining. This was used back in the 1930s, where areas would be restricted from getting loans. It was done predominantly in the black neighborhoods. The result of redlining and the other aspects I'm going to mention resulted in a reduction of service, education, fire, police, and medical services. It also created what is known as food and pharmacy deserts. Blockbusting was another tool that was used in order to get people to get out of the area. There's been cases where real estate agents have paid black women to walk down the street with a baby carriage in a white neighborhood to scare the white people. And also there's been cases where there have been phone calls made to white families in white neighborhoods with a person asking for someone with an Afro-American name. That was done obviously to create white flight. Rises in crime, the rent gap theory, where it becomes not profitable for you to even rent the home because the tax is so high. Then of course there's the tool of tax abatements for developers. That has not seemed to work out that well. Slum clearance, slum removal came along, and eminent domain, giving the government the right to pay you value for your land if they needed it. Oakland was founded by a gentleman named Horace Competia. It was incorporated in 1852, and its first ferry service to San Francisco was in 1851. Oakland was regarded as the Brooklyn to San Francisco, and it was called Oakland because of the oak trees. The Transcontinental Railroad terminated in Oakland, in the Oakland Wharf. That brought a tremendous amount of revenue to Oakland. Working on the railroads primarily were a lot of Chinese people who came over, and in 1850, Oakland had established its first Chinese neighborhood. In 1874, Oakland was discovered to have a deep water port, and that also began to make the city begin to blossom. In 1862, the federal land grants were passed, giving manifest destiny, which allowed most Americans, white Americans, to take advantage of expanding west, where they got land grants, followed by the Morrill Act, which allowed schools being built again for white people in the West. Going back to Oakland, in the United States in 1882, they passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, where it limited the amount of Chinese that could come into the country, and in some respects, it said that Chinese women could not come into the country. In 1906, there was the earthquake in San Francisco. It brought tremendous migration to Oakland, made it an opportunity to rebuild Oakland. The Japanese Americans also have a very big population in Oakland. It's called Japantown. It was established in 1890, and the other population that populated Oakland, another population I should say, was the Mexican population, which came after the bloody Mexican Revolution between 1810 and 1820. A lot of Mexicans came to Oakland. The Great Depression, the FHA administration brought, again, the redlining, the Great Migration of blacks from the north, from the south to the north, didn't really have that much of an impact in Oakland. In World War II, a lot of minorities came up to fill the gap for the soldiers that were fighting in World War II, and that became an incident in some towns surrounding Oakland with racial problems in plants, in manufacturing plants. In 1949, Truman passed the Housing Act for urban renewal and slum clearance. The key thing about that is it gave the power to the local jurisdictions on what areas that needed the exit ramps, the highways built through, and it took an adverse effect mainly on minority neighborhoods. Oakland was called the Detroit of the West, shipbuilding, cars, canneries, bakeries. In the 1956, the Federal Highway and Defense Act was launched, which really impacted a lot of minority neighborhoods in America. How that happened was Dwight D. Eisenhower was on a trip back in 1919 by car, and it took him 62 days to go from the East Coast to the West Coast. So he was really aggressive toward getting something done. In the 1970s, black population came to Oakland. There was a general loss of funds to all major cities. White flight occurred. There was basically, for maybe 40 years, a reduction of building houses, drugs, gangs, crime, the inner city. Oakland went wild. To give you an idea about the black population in Oakland, in 1940 it was 3%. By 1970 it was 35%. The Chicano movement also became pretty big between 1910 and 1950. And one of the aspects still going on today is called transit-oriented gentrification. It has different terms, but they're building our BART stations, which is the subway station for Oakland and San Francisco. And it seems that it's impacting neighborhoods to the respect that destroying some older neighborhoods, and as they rebuild the BART, the areas where the entrances and the egress points on the BART system are now being gentrified. The other issue is, if you look at Oakland, I mean, they lost the Raiders, they lost the Golden State Warriors. Who knows what's going to happen with the A's? I don't know if they've determined that yet. But transit-induced gentrification or transit-oriented gentrification, one community seems to have stood up to it, and that's the Chinese community in Oakland. They seem to be doing a good job. Let me also note that a lot of technology companies are seeing the benefits of moving to Oakland. As of the point of this article, Twitter just leased 4 floors in downtown Oakland. So you're going to see what's happening in Oakland that happened in San Francisco. Again, I'd like to thank you for your time. Subscribe, I have a lot more good content to bring you, and you have a great day.